Have you ever walked into a room where everyone was smiling and laughing, but you immediately felt like you'd stepped into an emotional minefield? Not because of anything you could point to. Just this overwhelming sense that beneath all the pleasant chatter, something was terribly wrong. Maybe it was the way someone's laugh didn't quite reach their eyes, or how the conversation suddenly shifted when certain topics came up. While everyone else seemed perfectly comfortable, you felt it in your chest, the tension, the unspoken resentment, the carefully buried pain. Or perhaps you've had that experience where you meet someone new, and within minutes, you just know things about them. You sense their loneliness behind the confident facade, their fear beneath the bravado, their hidden shame that they've never told anyone. Meanwhile, everyone else is buying the performance completely. If you're nodding right now, if you're thinking, yes, this is exactly what happens to me, then you might be what Carl Jung called an introverted intuitive, someone with the extraordinary ability to perceive what others cannot see. But here's what nobody tells you about this gift. It comes with a price that could literally destroy your life. What if I told you that this overwhelming sensitivity isn't a character flaw or social anxiety disorder, but evidence of a rare psychological capacity that most people have completely shut down? What if the very thing that makes you feel like a perpetual outsider is actually an ancient human function that every society has depended on, even as they feared and attacked the people who possessed it? Here's the uncomfortable truth that's been hidden from you. You're not broken. You're not too sensitive. You're not imagining things. You're perceiving real psychological dynamics that others either can't see or desperately don't want to acknowledge. And that makes you dangerous to them, because here's what happens when you can see what others cannot. You become a mirror. And most people hate looking in mirrors, especially when those mirrors reflect back the parts of themselves they've spent years trying to hide. Carl Jung discovered something that changes everything about how we understand this experience. He found that people with this kind of perception exist in what he called participation mystique, a state where your psychological boundaries become so porous that you literally absorb the emotional and mental states of everyone around you. You don't just observe their pain, you feel it. You don't just notice their deception, you carry the weight of their lies in your own body. But Jung also discovered something else. Something that most people never learn because they give up too early, overwhelmed by the intensity of what they're experiencing. This overwhelming sensitivity isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of one of the most powerful psychological transformations a human being can undergo. The same perceptive ability that feels like a curse can become what Jung called differentiated perception, a conscious, directed, and incredibly valuable gift. You can go from being the person who gets drained by everyone else's problems to being the person who can see solutions that others miss entirely. From the one who gets blamed for bringing up uncomfortable truths to the one who helps others navigate their own darkness. From society's scapegoat to what Jung called its consciousness pioneer. But only if you understand what's really happening to you and why it's happening now. The question isn't whether you can change. The question is, are you ready to discover why you were given this ability and how to wield it without it destroying you? Because once you understand the real reason you see what others cannot, everything changes. Your relationships change. Your sense of purpose changes. Your entire understanding of who you are and why you're here, it all shifts. So let me ask you directly, are you tired of feeling like you're drowning in other people's emotions while they get to stay comfortably numb? Are you ready to stop apologizing for seeing the truth? Are you ready to transform your greatest source of pain into your most powerful gift? If the answer is yes, then what I'm about to share with you will change your life forever. Let's start with the real reason why seeing what others cannot feel so dangerous, and why that danger is exactly what makes you so valuable. So why does seeing the truth feel so isolating? Picture this. You're at a family dinner, and everyone's acting like everything is perfectly normal. Your dad makes his third drink in an hour while cracking jokes that have a sharp edge. Your mom keeps changing the subject whenever anyone gets too close to anything real. Your brother scrolls through his phone, emotionally checked out, while your sister talks non-stop about surface-level achievements. And there you sit, feeling like you're the only one who can see the elephant in the room. The unspoken disappointments, the quiet desperation, the careful dance everyone's doing to avoid talking about what actually matters. When you try to bring up anything genuine, you're met with uncomfortable silence, deflection, or worse. You're labeled as the dramatic one, the one who always brings everyone down, the one who takes everything too seriously. Here's what's really happening in that moment. You're not seeing more than everyone else because you're broken or overly sensitive. You're seeing more because your psychological function is operating the way it was designed to operate. Carl Jung called this introverted intuition, the ability to perceive through the unconscious, to see the patterns and possibilities that others miss. But here's the part nobody warns you about. When you reflect back someone's unconscious material, their hidden shame, their unacknowledged fears, their secret resentments, they don't thank you for it. They attack you for it. You become what Jung's called a mirror for the collective shadow. You reflect back everything the group doesn't want to see about itself. And just like vampires supposedly can't look in mirrors, most people will do anything to avoid confronting their own psychological reflection. Think about your workplace. There's probably someone there who everyone calls difficult or negative. But if you really observe, you'll notice something interesting. This person often points out legitimate problems that everyone else is pretending don't exist. The poor communication, the toxic dynamics, the fact that the emperor has no clothes. Instead of addressing these issues, the group finds it easier to label the truth teller as the problem. They get marginalized, excluded from meetings, passed over for promotions. Not because they're incompetent, but because they make everyone else uncomfortable by seeing what others refuse to acknowledge. This is your lived experience, isn't it? You've been that person. The one who notices the dysfunction and gets blamed for bringing it up. The one who feels the tension and gets accused of creating it. What you're experiencing has a name in psychology: scapegoating. It's an ancient psychological defense mechanism where a group unconsciously selects one person to carry all their unwanted traits, all their collective guilt and shame. By casting you out, they get to maintain the illusion that they're the good ones, the normal ones, the healthy ones. And the most insidious part, they often convince you that you're the problem, that you need to be less intense, more positive, easier to be around. They make you doubt your own perceptions until you start wondering if maybe you really are too much. But what if I told you that your ability to see what others cannot isn't a bug? It's a feature. What if the very thing that makes you feel like an outsider is exactly what every unconscious group desperately needs, even though they'll fight against it? Because here's what nobody tells you about this painful dynamic. It gets worse before it gets better. The more clearly you see, the more dangerous you become to people who are invested in staying blind. The more clearly you see, the more dangerous you become to people who are invested in staying blind. But why? What makes your perception so threatening that people will literally attack you for it? The answer lies in something most people don't understand about how your mind actually works. Imagine for a moment that most people walk through the world wearing invisible psychological armor. Their boundaries are like walls, thick, solid, protective. They can sit in a room full of tension and genuinely not feel it. They can have a conversation with someone who's secretly angry and walk away completely unaffected. But you're walking through the world with invisible skin, permeable, absorbent, what psychologists call porous boundaries. Here's what this actually feels like. You walk into your friend's house, and within 5 minutes, you're inexplicably anxious. Your friend seems fine, chatting about normal things, but something feels off. Later, you find out they just had a massive fight with their partner an hour before you arrived. You didn't see the fight, you didn't hear about the fight, but you felt the emotional residue hanging in the air like smoke. Or maybe you're at work, sitting in a meeting, and suddenly you feel this wave of sadness that makes no sense. You look around the room, and everyone seems engaged and professional, but your chest feels heavy, like you're about to cry for no reason. Weeks later, you discover that your colleague just found out their parent has cancer. They didn't tell anyone, they kept it completely professional. But somehow, you felt their hidden grief. This isn't mystical, this isn't supernatural. This is your nervous system operating exactly as it was designed to operate. Carl Jung had a term for this: participation mystique. It's a state where the boundary between yourself and others becomes so thin that you literally participate in their psychological experience. You don't just observe their emotions, you absorb them. You don't just notice their thoughts, you think them. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what Jung observed over a century ago. Some people's brains are wired with what researchers call enhanced mirror neuron activity. When you watch someone experience an emotion, the same neural pathways fire in your brain. You literally feel what they feel, not metaphorically, but neurologically. But here's the part that changes everything. Most people think empathy is always a good thing. They praise sensitivity. They celebrate emotional intelligence. What they don't tell you is that uncontrolled empathy can destroy you. Because when you absorb everyone else's emotional states without conscious awareness, you lose track of where you end and others begin. That anxiety you felt at your friend's house, you carry it home with you. That sadness from your colleague, it becomes your sadness. Their stress becomes your stress. Their trauma becomes your trauma. You become what Jung called a psychological sponge, soaking up the emotional debris of everyone around you. And the most dangerous part? You start thinking it's all yours. You start believing you're naturally anxious, naturally depressed, naturally overwhelming, when in reality, you're just carrying everyone else's unprocessed emotions. This is why crowds exhaust you, why you need so much alone time to recover, why you feel drained after social interactions that seem to energize everyone else. You're not antisocial or defective. You're processing not just your own experience, but the unconscious emotional data of every person you encounter. And this porousness, this inability to control what you absorb, is precisely what makes you so vulnerable to something far more sinister than just emotional overwhelm. Because when you can feel what others won't acknowledge, when you reflect back what they're desperately trying to hide, you become the perfect target for their darkest psychological defense mechanism. When you can feel what others won't acknowledge, when you reflect back what they're desperately trying to hide, you become the perfect target for their darkest psychological defense mechanism. Let me show you how this works in real time. Think about the last time someone got cancelled online. Not for something genuinely harmful, but for saying something that made people uncomfortable. Something that pointed out a truth everyone could feel, but nobody wanted to admit. Here's what actually happens. Someone posts about workplace inequality, relationship toxicity, or social hypocrisy. Within hours, thousands of people who've never met this person are united in their outrage. They're not just disagreeing, they're attacking with a viciousness that seems completely disproportionate to the original offense. What you're witnessing isn't justice, it's scapegoating. Carl Jung understood that every person carries what he called a shadow, all the parts of themselves they don't want to acknowledge, the greed they deny, the prejudice they hide, the selfishness they won't admit, the cowardice they've buried. When someone with porous boundaries like yours comes along and mirrors that shadow back at them, something primal gets triggered. They don't see their own reflection and think, "Oh, I should work on this." They see their reflection and think, "Kill the messenger." Because here's the psychological reality. It's infinitely easier to attack the person pointing out the problem than it is to face the problem itself. You've lived this, haven't you? You point out that your family has a drinking problem, and suddenly you're the dramatic one who ruins every gathering. You mention that your workplace has serious communication issues, and you become the negative employee who can't be a team player. You notice that your friend group excludes certain people, and you're the one who always makes things awkward. They're not mad at you for being wrong. They're mad at you for being right. This is the ancient ritual of scapegoating, playing out in modern relationships, workplaces, and social media. A group unconsciously selects one person to carry all their unwanted traits, all their collective shame and guilt. By casting you out, by labeling you as the problem, they get to maintain the illusion that they're the good ones, and your porous boundaries make you the perfect target. Because you don't just point out their shadow, you absorb it. You feel their guilt, their shame, their unacknowledged darkness. And when someone can sense your inner world that clearly, it's terrifying for them. They attack you, not for what you've done, but for what you can see. The most insidious part? They often succeed in convincing you that you really are the problem, that you need to be smaller, quieter, less perceptive. They gaslight you into doubting the very gift that threatens them. But what if I told you that this targeting isn't random? What if your ability to see and absorb the collective shadow isn't a curse? It's a calling. Because throughout history, every culture has had people like you. The shamans who descended into the underworld, the prophets who spoke uncomfortable truths, the healers who absorbed the community's sickness to transform it. They were feared. They were often cast out, but they were also essential. Because here's what nobody tells you about this ancient pattern. The scapegoating doesn't just hurt you, it keeps everyone else stuck. By attacking the truth teller instead of facing the truth, they never have to grow, never have to change, never have to become conscious. Your targeting serves their unconsciousness. Your pain maintains their comfort. But what if there was another way? What if instead of being destroyed by your sensitivity, you could learn to wield it consciously? What if instead of being destroyed by your sensitivity, you could learn to wield it consciously? Here's the shift that changes everything. You are not a victim of your perception. You are an undeveloped master of it. Think of it this way. Right now, you're like someone who's been handed a precision surgical instrument, but no one ever taught you it wasn't a butter knife. You've been trying to spread jam with a scalpel, wondering why everything gets messy and painful. Your sensitivity isn't the problem. Your lack of training with it is the problem. Carl Jung discovered that people like you don't need to become less sensitive. You need to become more conscious. He called this journey individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole and differentiated. But what does that actually mean in practical terms? It means learning to distinguish between your emotions and everyone else's emotions. It means developing what Jung called differentiated perception, the ability to see clearly without being overwhelmed by what you see. Here's how this transformation works. Instead of unconsciously absorbing every emotional state in the room, you learn to observe them consciously. Instead of feeling responsible for everyone else's pain, you recognize it as information. Instead of being a passive sponge, you become an active mirror with boundaries. Let me give you a concrete example. You walk into that tense family dinner we talked about earlier. But now, instead of absorbing all that anxiety and carrying it in your chest, you notice it consciously. There's unresolved conflict in this room. Dad's drinking is creating tension that no one wants to address. Mom is managing everyone's emotions to keep the peace. You see it clearly. You understand it deeply, but you don't make it yours. This is what Jung meant by conscious participation. You're still perceiving the dynamics. In fact, you're seeing them more clearly than ever, but you're no longer drowning in them. Modern psychology has proven that Jung was right about this process. Research on interoception, your ability to sense your own internal bodily states, shows that people who can accurately tune into their own heartbeat their own breathing, their own physical sensations, are also better at distinguishing their emotions from others' emotions. The path forward isn't to dull your sensitivity. It's to sharpen your awareness of your own internal world so you can tell the difference between what's yours and what's theirs. Think of it as developing your psychological immune system. A healthy immune system doesn't shut out everything. That would kill you. It learns to distinguish between what belongs in your body and what doesn't. It lets in the nutrients and fights off the toxins. Your psychological boundaries need to work the same way. Permeable enough to gather valuable information, strong enough to protect your core self. But here's where most people get stuck. They're terrified of setting boundaries because they think it means becoming cold, selfish, or disconnected. They've been told their whole lives that their sensitivity is their virtue, that absorbing everyone's pain makes them a good person. What if I told you that unconscious absorption actually serves no one? When you take on everyone else's emotions, you become less capable of actually helping them. You become reactive, overwhelmed, and often resentful. But when you learn to perceive consciously, with boundaries intact, you become incredibly powerful. You can see what others need without sacrificing yourself to give it to them. This is the real transformation, from unconscious empath to conscious healer. From psychological victim to what Jung called a consciousness pioneer. But the journey isn't easy. And there's a reason most people never complete it. The journey isn't easy. And there's a reason most people never complete it. It's not because they can't. It's because when you start developing conscious boundaries, everyone around you freaks out. Picture this. You've spent years being the emotional dumping ground for your family, your friends, your co-workers. You're the one they call when they need to vent. The one who always says yes when they need help. The one who absorbs their anxiety so they can sleep peacefully at night. Then you start setting boundaries. You stop answering every crisis call at midnight. You stop taking on their projects when you're already overwhelmed. You stop nodding sympathetically when they complain about the same problems for the 100th time without taking any action. What happens next? They don't celebrate your growth. They attack it. You've become so selfish. You're not the person I used to know. You've changed, not in a good way. You used to care about people. This is the moment most people give up, because the very people who benefited from your unconscious absorption are now punishing you for becoming conscious. Here's what they're really saying. Go back to being our emotional shock absorber. Go back to carrying what we don't want to carry. Go back to being small so we can stay comfortable. And part of you wants to give in. Because at least when you were unconsciously absorbing everyone's pain, people liked you. They needed you. You felt useful, even if it was killing you slowly. But here's the brutal truth. They didn't love you. They loved what you did for them. They loved having someone who would take on their emotional labor without asking for anything in return. They loved having a dumping ground that never complained. The moment you start requiring them to deal with their own emotions, their own problems, their own growth, they reveal who they really are. This is Jung's concept of shadow work in action. When you refuse to carry their shadow anymore, they're forced to confront it themselves. And most people will do anything to avoid that confrontation, including trying to guilt you back into unconsciousness. What if I lose my empathy? You might be thinking. What if setting boundaries makes me cold and disconnected? Here's the revolutionary truth. Conscious boundaries don't diminish your empathy. They purify it. When you're not drowning in everyone else's emotions, you can actually see them clearly enough to help them. Think about the best therapists, the most effective healers, the wisest mentors you've ever encountered. They don't take on your pain. They hold space for it. They see it clearly, understand it deeply, but they don't absorb it into their own bodies. That's not cold. That's skillful. That's the difference between being a wounded healer and being a conscious healer. But you're terrified of standing in that power, aren't you? Because power means responsibility. It means no longer being able to play victim when relationships get difficult. It means owning your choices instead of blaming your sensitivity. It means admitting that maybe, just maybe, you've been using your absorption as a way to avoid dealing with your own issues. It's easier to focus on everyone else's problems than to face your own shadow work. The people who complete this transformation are the ones who can sit with this discomfort, the ones who can tolerate being disliked for setting boundaries, the ones who choose growth over comfort, consciousness over unconscious approval. But even if you withstand the backlash from others, you must face the traps you can set for yourself. Jung warned of 3 specific pitfalls for the developing perceiver. The inflation trap. You become arrogant, identifying with your gifts so much that you start believing you are a prophet meant to save everyone. The withdrawal trap. You do the opposite, using your perception as an excuse to retreat from the unconscious world, becoming a spiritual hermit defeated by life. The helper trap. You become addicted to being needed, defining your entire identity by your ability to see for others, and you lose yourself completely. Avoiding these internal traps is the final, crucial test of becoming a true consciousness pioneer. Because on the other side of this resistance lies something extraordinary. On the other side of this resistance lies something extraordinary. When you complete this transformation, when you learn to wield your perception consciously instead of being overwhelmed by it, you don't just heal yourself. You become what Jung called a consciousness pioneer. Let me paint you a picture of what this actually looks like. You walk into that same family dinner we've been talking about, but now, instead of absorbing the tension and carrying it home in your chest, you see the whole pattern clearly. You understand why dad drinks, why mom overcompensates, why your siblings check out emotionally. You see the generational trauma being passed down unconsciously. But here's the difference. You see it with compassion instead of judgment. Because you've done your own shadow work, you're no longer horrified by their dysfunction. You recognize it as human, and because you're not drowning in their emotions, you can actually be present for them in a way you never could before. You can ask the right questions, you can offer genuine support, you can hold space for their growth without sacrificing yourself for it. This is what conscious perception looks like in action. You become a healing presence simply by being fully yourself. Boundaries intact, awareness sharp, heart open. Your workplace transforms too. Instead of being the person who gets blamed for pointing out problems, you become the person who can see solutions that others miss entirely. Because you're not reactive anymore, people start trusting your insights. They begin coming to you not to dump their emotional labor, but to gain genuine perspective. You become what organizations desperately need but rarely find. Someone who can see the whole system clearly and help it evolve. But the most profound shift happens in your relationships. The people who are using you for emotional labor either transform or remove themselves from your life, and in their place come individuals who appreciate your gift without exploiting it. You attract people who are also doing their own work, who understand that real intimacy comes from 2 whole people choosing each other, not from one person absorbing the other's unprocessed pain. Your sensitivity becomes your superpower instead of your weakness. You can sense what others need before they know it themselves. You can see the potential in people that they can't see in themselves. You can navigate complex social dynamics with grace and wisdom. This is your true calling. Not to be society's emotional dumping ground, but to be its consciousness carrier. To help the collective see what it refuses to acknowledge. To hold the tension between comfort and growth. To make the unconscious conscious. Jung understood that people like you aren't meant to blend in. You're meant to serve as bridges between the conscious and unconscious worlds. You're the shamans, the healers, the seers. Not in some mystical sense, but in the most practical sense imaginable. You help others wake up by staying awake yourself. The question now isn't whether you have this gift. You do. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you ready to stop being society's scapegoat and become its consciousness pioneer? Are you ready to transform your greatest source of pain into your most powerful gift? The world needs people like you to step into their power, not tomorrow, today.